Great. We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Xander Willoughby. I work on Connexus at Search for Common Ground. Today's webinar is hosted by the Asia Religious and Ethnic Freedom Project, funded by USAID. We'll link in both the show notes and in the chat a moment where you can learn more about the Asia Religious and Ethnic Freedom Project. You can see a lot of the great resources that have been produced so far. But we have three really wonderful speakers. We have Suvechchha from Nepal, Shaloom from Pakistan, and Andrew from Malaysia, who are going to share a bit more about their work in general. I'll leave introductions to them, but then also touch on sort of a range of topics relating to religious majoritarianism in Asia. So, Suvechchha, I'll just go ahead and hand the floor to you right off the bat.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good morning from here. I don't know which part of the world you are, but yeah, good morning. I'm Suvechchha. I am from Nepal. And briefly to talk about me, I work in the space of civic engagement, democracy, and good governance in Nepal. And I am a graduate of international relations and diplomacy, and I currently work with Accountability Lab Nepal. So today I'll be talking about religious majoritarianism in Asia, but my presentation basically will be focused on Nepal and South Asia. So yeah, I would like to start the presentation with the most ideal definition of what democracy is. So democracy, we all know, is defined as for people, by the people, to the people. But democracy is also about a majority. And sometimes when it's about majority, the voices of the minorities are sidelined. And this quote by Albert Camus actually defines that democracy is the law of, it's not just the law of majority, but also about the protection of minority. So I just wanted to give a quick quote on the topic. And now let's discuss what religious majoritarianism actually is. So how do we know if the country is showing religious majoritarianism tendency is when when a dominant religious group or individuals exert influence in decision making of the state or in the policy making and other kind of decisions that are taken in the state, and when the majority's views are reflected in the decisions and programs and policies of the state, and also when the rights of the minorities are sidelined or undermined. So that's how we know that there is religious majoritarianism in the state. And what actually causes, let's also discuss about what causes religious majoritarianism. So one of the leading causes at this point in time, as we see the examples of countries across South Asia, is one is populism. So more and more number of leaders and political parties are focusing on identity-based politics or faith-based politics to appease their voters and to become popular and enhance their voting banks. The other reason is also historical beliefs. When the citizens of the population of the country and political leaders have a generational belief that their religion is superior and their state needs some sort of purification from other religion, that is also when religious majoritarianism comes into play. And also if the state feels threatened, or the political leaders or citizens feel threatened by other religions, that also give rise to religious majoritarianism. So that is another. There is also another reason is social and economic disparities. When power or resources in a country is centered around people of one single religion, that also gives rise to religious majoritarianism. Other is when the state and religion is tied, like when a approach to state functioning is directly tied to a religion, that also pushes towards laws and policy becoming very religion focused. We can see this sort of example in Saudi Arabia or Israel, for example. And population dividend could also be another contributing factor to religious majoritarianism. When a state has more than two-thirds of population practicing a single religion, that also could push towards it. And the other reasons that we are at least seeing in South Asia is political propaganda, which is again very similar to populism, lack of interreligion dialogue, so interfaith dialogue or consensus, where when it is not built, that also leads to this sort of conflicts. And also media accountability, when the media also become biased and take a stand or become very politicized, that also leads to religious majoritarianism. And now to just give you a short glimpse of South Asian states. So it has not been very long that we saw the entire Buddhist and Tamil, sort of conflict in Sri Lanka. And now, like, India has become another hotspot of religious majoritarianism. There's a lot written about the Hindutva movement that is happening in India, and which is being led by the leading political party, Bharatiya Janata Party of India. So as this political ideology of Hindu supremacy is circulating around India, and the party is trying to enhance that, there has been increasing cases of violence, or increasing cases of violence against Indian Muslims is being reported in India. In 2019, India amended its Citizenship Act, which also received widespread criticism when the act actually was aimed at providing citizenship to the illegal immigrant that are staying in India that have come from neighboring countries. But that act deliberately left or undermined the Muslims that would migrate to India. So the act said that only the Hindus and other religious immigrants would be getting the citizenship, but not the Muslims. So that also really sort of showed showed the Hindutva movement that was taking place in India and how it was undermining the Muslims. And in Bangladesh as well, Bangladesh as a country is built on Bengali identity. That's how Bangladesh was established. But now the policies and the state approaches are slowly moving towards Islamization. So, I mean, I'm not particularly very aware of it, but I mean, I do study, but it's based on the articles and that is circulating around. And also in Nepal, that I'll briefly discuss in my presentation later, there is a rise of Hindu nationalism in Nepal as well. And now, just to give you an example, I talked about the causes of religious majoritarianism, and I would just like to give an example of Nepal, and you may be able to relate to all of those causes that I said earlier about populism, population dividend, history, everything. So Nepal's religious composition, you see, is there is 80% Hindu, 4% Islam, and 1% Christianity. So as you can see, Hindu are really religiously dominant in Nepal. And the religion and politics of Nepal has always had some linkage because Nepal was initially a monarchy, and the monarchs are usually were worshipped as a symbol of God. So symbol of God Vishnu, which is a god in Hinduism. So and during the from 1960s to 1990s, the power in Nepal was centered around a king, and the king tried to impose Nepali identity based on Hindu religion. So during that time, the Hindu religion and Hindu identity was really like reinforced in Nepal. And after that, in 1990s, a people war began in Nepal, which tried to alter the historical relations of population. Nepal is a very hierarchical society. There are division based on gender, caste, ethnicity, also religion. So the entire people war or Maoist movement, as we see, began to just alter this oppression against minorities. And after the war ended and the peace process completed, Nepal was declared a secular democratic federal republic. So Nepal was no longer a Hindu state after 2008. But somehow the leading political elites and population of Nepal still have that nostalgia of Hindu state, and it is becoming more evident now than before. The Rashtriya Prajatantra Party, which is a pro-monarchy and Hindu conservative party, and which participated in the election with the agenda of making Hindu state again. We can see that the number of the party in parliament has been increasing. In 2013, it was 7. Now it's 14. So we can see how the citizens are also wanting Nepal to become a Hindu state again. And also with the rise of Hindutva movement in India, some of its ripple effects are being seen in Nepal as well. Recently, like Prime Minister Prachanda, was a leader of Maoist movement, who actually fought to make Nepal a secular state and make Nepal a classless society. And he's also a communist. It's a communist party. Was recently seen worshipping in a Hindu temple in India. So it shows how, Hindutva movement is influencing Nepal and how political elites themselves, keeping aside their prior ideologies, are really like taking this agenda of Hindutva very seriously. to establish their footholds in Nepal. And also recently, one of the report of United States government linked, Bharatiya Janata Party of funding high-profile politicians of Nepal to speak in favor of Hinduism. And it's not just one party. I mean, Rashtriya Prajatantra Party largely as a party has been advocating for the cause, but there are also politicians aside in other political parties that, I mean, even if entire political party may not have taken the agenda, the political leaders in other political parties are also coming forward with the same agenda to become more popular and to enhance their vote banks. Yeah, I think I will stop here. I'm not sure if I could complete that in time. And I'm happy to answer any question that comes on the way. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suvechchha, for giving us a bit of context and sort of an overview of the work in Nepal. Next, we'll turn a bit west to Shaloom in Pakistan. So greetings, everybody. It's really great being here, and thanks to Connexus for having me on the panel with such decorated and accomplished people. It's such an honor for me. So today we will be talking about the religious majoritarianism in Asia. I will be generally discussing the religious majoritarianism, some of its aspects. So we will be just discussing the religious majoritarianism in the beginning, and later I will try to explore how the identity and identity politics plays a pivotal role in the religious majoritarianism and the politics of religious majoritarianism. And this we will be discussing two of the aspects. First, the realization of identity, and second is the politicization of identity. Suvechchha, which speaks for me, she also discussed some of its very important aspects, and we will just try to dig deeper into how it is established and how it plays role. And later we will discuss the religious majoritarian models which are being practiced. We will talk a little bit about the religious majoritarian approach, which is prevalent in some countries and under what situation it is permissible. And we will also discuss the critique and drawback about it. So first, if we go with the religious majoritarianism, so religious majoritarianism is an ideology of the majoritarianism which have religion as its pivotal identity, which believes that the religion which is in the majority in the present situation in a state is having the authority and is entitled to make the rules and is entitled to lead all the nation. This ideology believes in the supremacy of the majority religion community, and it sometimes, when it reaches to its extreme position, it actually sabotages the rights of the minorities present in that specific atmosphere. For example, we can see such examples in the South Asia as discussed the case of India by the previous speaker, and also in the Pakistan as well, how when the religious majoritarianism reached its peak in 1974, a specific community, Ahmadi community, they were nominated to be a non-Muslims by the state, and state actually jumped in to decide religion of one entire community. So that is one of the very high example of the extremist position of the religious majoritarianism. So identity politics, how it actually plays role in the religious majoritarianism. Identity is the very key feature in any kind of politics. And when we specifically look at the South Asia religion, plays as the very major identity along with our racial, along with our ethnic identity. So religious identity, when for the religious identity, it requires a specific event or the series of events to occur to actually develop the realization in the specific community towards their religious identity. For example, if we look at the case of the identity of Muslims and Hindus in Pakistan and India and go backward to the period of the partition, we will see that at that point, colonialism played a major role towards the realization of the identity between the Hindus and Muslims. And when that realization emerges, it brings with it the prejudice in the favor of your own community. And the next step of that is the politicization of the identity. When it reaches the next step, politics is constructed around that very identity. It increases to develop this us versus them notion, and the competition between the two communities arises. as we can see that during the time of the partition of the Pakistan and India, there were numerous events, and every political event which was happening, it was moving, it was playing its role, and it was contributing towards making the identity more rigid, both towards the Hindus and towards the Muslim side. And it become highly politicized that at the end, both the countries have to separate their ways and emerge in a new country. But it doesn't stop there. Once a religious identity is politicized, it tries to evolve and and change its shape towards another stage. For example, when we see the Bangladesh was separated from the Pakistan, it was having its ethnic identity as its pivotal point of the partition. But later, the suppressed religious identity, which was very active during the time of the colonization of India and Pakistan, that re-emerged. We can see that when the Bangladesh got its independence, it had its slogan as Jai Bengal, which represents that their ethnic identity was very much dominant. But later on, that slogan it was converted to Bangladesh Zindabad, which which is a Urdu language slogan, and it connects more to their religious identity. So religious identities actually re-emerges when it reaches to the level of the majoritarianism. So when we look at the religious majoritarian models in the Pakistan, in the South Asia, in Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, as discussed in Nepal, and majoritarian models in the South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, we will see that they are not very suitable models for the progress of the minority people, and they sometimes sabotage the rights of the minority, and sometimes it becomes difficult for certain minorities to live in the specific places. But there are models of the religious majoritarianism which are accepted by certain theorists and are also being practiced. One of such model is the religious majoritarian approach, which is being practiced in some of the Western states. According to this specific model, this approach allows the government to collaborate with the majoritarian religion and actually uses its funds and its policies in the favor of that religion. Governments are allowed to do this, but there is a check on it that they should not violate the rights of the minority groups. This specific approach, it has some pretext toward it, that the governments are only allowed to favor the majority religions only when the values of that religion has become the part of the culture of that specific country, and it has been practiced by the it has been practiced by 2 or 3 generations and has passed on to the next generation. And the second prereq is the no minority should face the violation of rights under this model. One of the example to understand this model is the Lotasi versus Italy case in 2011. In that case, one of the mother filed a case against the public school for displaying the crucifixes on the walls of the classroom. And when that case was brought forward in the Supreme Court of Italy and later in the courts of European, as mentioned, for the human rights violation for the students of other faiths, that the court produced the result in the favor. The court produced the results in the favor of the Italy government and allowed them to display the crucifixes, as that became the part of their culture. And displaying the crucifixes in the school, it was part of the culture. So according to this model, it was not harming someone else's religion, and it was not compelling someone else to be part of that specific religion. But then again, there is a critique that there is no empirical or sociological way to find out that if a specific religion or its custom are actually part of of the culture of your country. And then again, when a religious majoritarian model or such approaches, when they reach the limit of extremism, it becomes difficult to contain the rights of the minority. So with this, we move towards the conclusion. The models like religious majoritarian approach, they are very workable for the countries where the democratic values are cherished and celebrated. But for the states like Asian states, where we still are struggling to develop the better democratic values and institutions, it's a failed model, could not work here properly. The only way we can develop a better situation for the religious minorities is to
promote the democratic values and customs until and unless we are able to promote them in our cultures and societies, it would be very difficult for us to develop a secure environment for the minorities. So that was all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaloom. We really appreciate having you with us today. Also, a huge thank you. Our webinar today spans 12 different time zones. So our next speaker, Andrew in Malaysia, 12 hours ahead of me. I see people in the audience in Kyrgyzstan where it's 8:30. So thank you everyone for joining us today for this really important discussion. Andrew, I'm sharing your screen. So I'll give you the floor whenever you're ready. For joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and share a little bit. I have a little bit of a mixed background. I'm a practicing advocate and solicitor in Malaysia, and I have some responsibility at the professional bar level. I co-chair the Constitutional Law Committee, and I also am a member of the Human Rights Committee. And I see some of my fellow members signed on to this webinar. Thanks for joining. Why are you up so late? Because it's about 10:30 in the evening in Malaysia. I also have some religious organizational hats. I'm a legal advisor to the Anglican Church here in Peninsular Malaysia, and also on the legal panel of the Christian Federation of Malaysia, which is an umbrella body of all the Christian groupings in Malaysia. What I thought I'd start with really is to go back to the basics, as it were. I think we all know it, but I think it's also useful for us to be reminded that when we talk about religious freedom, and to some extent, that's what we're looking at. What do we understand by religious freedom? It's the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And it includes the freedom to change religion or belief, and the freedom to manifest that religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. I put in the section of exceptions because I want to come back to this, and it's quite important, I think, for us to understand. So even in the UDHR, there were exceptions that were allowed, and basically it was to secure the due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and meeting the just requirement of morality, public order, and general welfare in democratic society. So please remember some of these words, because we'll come back and we'll revisit them. So the UDHR, of course, as we know, was augmented and developed, 18 years later through the ICCPR, and we basically see the same sort of setup of what freedom of religion is. But then we have again a reminder that no one should be subject to coercion, which impairs freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice. And then we again get to the idea of what are the permitted limitations. And here again, we see a bit of a shift. We talk about necessary to protect public safety, public order, public health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So, and again, in the ICCPR, not in the section that deals with religious freedom, but in Article 27, there is a reminder that there is a duty on the part of states which are signatory to the ICCPR, where in those states there are ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities, then persons belonging to those minorities cannot be denied the right, either individually or in community, to enjoy their own culture, profess and practice their own religion, or to use their own language. And so sometimes in language, in religion, is also a cross-cutting category of freedom. And what we have then is, through the years, some developments, the states in the international level trying to come up with further definitions, further clarifications, refinements of this freedom of religion. And unfortunately, it's not come to a level of a convention. So you have the UN Declaration on the Elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. And this is 1981. And again, you see, a similar setting out of what the right is, what it also means, and, what are some of the restrictions. And then just to let you know that as part of this, there's actually a very helpful list of what are some of the sort of freedoms that are associated with the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. So things like to worship and assemble, to establish and maintain charitable humanitarian institutions, to use articles, materials, equipment for your religious rites, and then also all these other things. I won't go into detail. Yeah, I'm sure you can find some stuff. But at least this very clearly sets out in this declaration what, in very practical terms, what freedom of religion means. And again, there is a reason why I have set all these things out, and we'll come and we'll talk about them in, I think, in a minute or so. And then this is in terms of what it means to have intolerance and discrimination. It means having any distinction or exclusion, restriction or preference based on religion or belief. And the purpose or its effect is the nullification or impairment of the recognition or enjoyment and exercise of human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis for others. So it's a restriction based on religion or belief. And then again, a reminder in a further declaration, again, not the convention. This is a 1992 Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National, Ethnic, Religious, or Linguistic Minorities, that the state, again, has a duty to protect the existence of religious minorities and then to encourage conditions that promote that identity. So again, positive duties on the part of the state. So having looked at the law, I think we now come to what I would call some I wouldn't say conclusions, but some observations. So I've labeled this as characteristics, and I've tried not to just look at my own country, which is Malaysia, but to be a little bit more general, since the topic's about religious majoritarianism in Asia. And what I think I postulate as some observation points are, firstly, that where there is a state or official religion or doctrine, and the Constitution permits or may permit restrictions and discriminations. I looked at the Constitution of Malaysia, where we have some of those restrictions in terms of you can practice, you can profess, but when it comes to proselytization, there are limitations. Constitution allows for restriction and control. Likewise, I think we see in Myanmar and in other countries some attempt to restrict the freedom to change one's religion. And so while there is some sort of freedom in general, in certain specific cases, that freedom is restricted pursuant to something which is stated in the Constitution. And then the Constitution will allow for laws that regulate, as I said again, conversion, prohibiting hate speech against religion in general. But we also then see that in some countries, there is an asymmetrical application of the law against hate speech, so that, again, in favor of the majoritarian religion, if you speak against the majoritarian religion, then you'll find yourself in trouble. But if you speak about a minority religion, or especially if you're a member of the majority religion speaking negatively about a minority religion, then you don't seem to face legal sanctions. So the law may be there, it may be written in very equal terms, but when it's actually applied by the police or by instrumentalities of the state, you see the bias in that application of the law, favoring members of the majority religion and disfavoring members of the minority religion. And then also in cases of discussion of religion in public, there are limitations. And these limitations are sometimes raised in the name of protecting religious sensitivities, defending religious harmony. So that whole issue of Article 29.2, which I asked you to sort of make a mental note of, the limitations and the restrictions, which have been repeated, talking about public health, public safety, public morality. You can see attempts in different countries to try and justify the limitation, and in fact, justify some of the other restrictions to freedom of religion on the basis that somehow this upset peace and harmony, and therefore is a threat to national security. And I mean, other speakers have already more pointedly looked at the connections to race and religion or regional nationalism, of identity. So again, it's very much about the case of a majority religion being part of the majority race, and the idea of the interconnection and the very close connection there is between race and religion, and how then that affects people's ability to talk about their identity. So when you talk about identity, when you challenge identity, it's seen as a proxy for challenging religion. And then that invokes all the different laws about hate speech and defamation of religion. So as I said, as a conclusion to the characteristics, the limitations are imposed or justified in the name of preservation of social cohesion, peace and harmony, national security, and therefore, at least at a very nominal, superficial level, not seemingly inconsistent with the UDHR. And so some of the challenges that we face when it comes to freedom of religion and a majoritarian religion, well, in some countries, and I think the previous speaker talked about it, you talk about traditions that have been accepted, have come to be accepted as the traditions of the country as a whole. These again tend to favor the majority religion, and the people who are the religious leaders or the politicians who are in league with the religious leaders of the major religion then decide what is acceptable in terms of uses of words and phrases, uses of practices, even little things like the kind of architecture, the kind of buildings that you can build as places of worship. They have to conform to a majoritarian dictated idea of what is acceptable. So all these challenges here are in many ways a protection of the majority against what they see as inroads and intrusions or incursions into the space that has been taken up and reserved in many ways for the majoritarian religion. So you talk about interreligious issues of marriage and children arising from mixed marriages and from conversion. And as I said earlier, the partisan of the prejudice of law enforcement agencies, many of them who will be members of the majoritarian religion, again, using their position, power, and the fact that they are the law enforcement agencies in the country to promote a particular brand of that religion. And so again, outlawing or negativing other forms or interpretations of the religion which is not endorsed by the state. And then what it sees as threats, even threats of liberalism, pluralism, LGBTism is a new ism, and also human rights. I mean, you hear much more of people talking about human rights as a Western concept that is a challenge to religion in Asia. It's a Western inroad. So you see much of that. And so in many ways, the problem is that it then justifies what I would say is, in inverted commas, righteous violence perpetrated or perpetuated in the name of this state-dictated religion or religious orthodoxy. And so when that kind of violence occurs, what you see the law enforcement agencies doing is not going after the perpetrators of the violence, but the perpetrators of the causes that led to the violence. And so it's not the people who actually undertake the violence that are to blame, but it's the people who allegedly provoke these people to act in a particular sort of way. So these, I think, are some of the challenges of having majoritarian religion so much linked to the idea of state control, power, and democracy. And I think that's my last slide for now. And so just again, to take a step back, for those of you who are not familiar, there is this organization in the US called Pew Research Center, and they publish annually government restrictions index and the social hostilities index. And they try to measure the level of government regulation in the area of religion. On the one hand, that's the GRI. And then they also measure amounts of social cohesion or lack of cohesion. You're talking about violent acts, riots, or whatever things. And one can see, although there's not an exact sort of parallel, but countries in Asia, at least in 2020, which is the latest year that they have statistics, countries in Asia with both a very high or high rating on the government restriction index also have either a very high or high rating on the social hostility index. So the idea that rules are put into place to calm things down doesn't quite work out in, for example, Afghanistan, India, Indonesia, and Pakistan, where you have both a very high regulated sphere when it comes to religion, and yet it still, causes social, interreligious, interracial, intercommunal conflict. And one of the reasons I would postulate for a high government restriction index is, as I said earlier, and I just want to repeat it, the idea that you use laws to in some way indirectly promote or perpetuate your set of moral beliefs or the majority's sets of morals beliefs. So the idea of freedom of assembly, yes, but only if it's not against, or whatever is being discussed or whatever is being protested against is not the majority religion, then it's okay. Then you have things like planning on zoning laws, which are also used to try and make sure that there is control by the majoritarian religion over the minority religion. So in terms of even planning, architectural design, architectural approval, local council rules, all these are done. And then if you recall the slide that I showed you about what freedom of religion means in terms of what freedoms you have, freedom to form associations, freedom to raise funds, freedom to carry out your activities, then you also see by virtue of the majoritarian control of the democratic institutions and the lawmaking institutions in these countries, you have what seems to be very innocuous or secular custom and import rules, anti-money laundering, exchange control use are then instrumentalized in some ways to make it difficult for religious-based organizations to operate. And this then also then goes into things like printing and what you can print, what you can publish, the kind of educational material you can share, and in some countries even what kind of dress codes are allowed in terms of public attire in the public sphere. So there's very much control of the public square by the majority religion through its control of the democratic forces in the country, which then sets the tone and sets the space, and they are the ones that define the space and the scope for minority religions to exist and to coexist within those countries. So I hope that in a very brief sort of way, in the short time that we've all been given, I've been able to at least highlight some issues, prompt some thinking on the part of those of you who are very kindly tuned in for today's webinar. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and to each of our speakers. But these topics are never something that we can fully cover in an hour. So I really appreciate you giving us each sort of a sampling of your expertise. I'll be sharing out ways for people to learn more about both each of your work, but then also work from the broader Asia Relations and project in general. I'll invite the speakers who have camera access, if you want to join us, we'll transition to Q&A and discussion. We have a few really good questions already queued up that I'll call on people. The first question, I'll go to Abdul Razak. You want to ask a question? Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the various presentations. My question is about civil society. We know that some countries, political leaders play about this religious majoritarianism to divide the population for the political ends. So my question is, what role should civil society play in order to prevent conflict and extremist idea that can arise from the instrumentalization of the religion? Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Razak. And we have on our panel people from the CSO space, from the researcher space, and the legal space. So I'm curious to hear all three of your thoughts on CSO's roles on this topic. Suvechchha, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I can give some examples from how CSOs in Nepal are trying to, address this issue of rising nationalism. And so one of the things is, of course, advocacy to, if your country already has a secular status and it really tells itself a democracy or it's a democracy system, I think civil society should come together and advocate to really retain that democratic status of the country. And the other thing that civil society can also do is foster dialogue between people of different religions, just to there are populist leaders, but then there are lots of communities who stay together, and communities are mostly built on people from different religions. They do sit together in a community. So really promoting and fostering that community dialogues and trying to build that interreligion trust is, I think, very important. And also, highlighting positive approaches as to how, trust can be built between 2 or 3 religions. I think that can be one of the prominent roles that civil society can play. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that role of CSOs sort of being the connective tissue between different parts of society being so important. Shaloom, do you have thoughts on Abdulrazak's question?
So, as the previous speaker mentioned, in Pakistan also there are many CSOs and many organizations which have been working in the area of very in the area legally, and also for the promotion of, and also in the area of advocacy. So, in last census in Pakistan, the minorities of Pakistan were undercounted, due to which they were unable to avail some of the privileges which the majority population was able to get. So there were many organizations which were working on the clear and transparent census of the country. And apart from that, there is a barrier in the educational sector where the propagation towards the other religions and other faiths and other identities, they are not taught that thoroughly. So there are organizations which have been putting forward effort to, you know, spread awareness about the belief system of the different religious identities. So there be some interfaith dialogue. So these are two of the major sectors, I believe, legally and advocacy, which the CSOs can play towards to counter the religious majoritarianism in the countries who are facing these.
Great. Thank you, Shaloom. Yeah, that idea of both transparency and the educational role that CSOs can play as well. Andrew, sorry to go to you last as we sort of exhaust potential answers, but if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear them as well. No worries. We'll move on to Indira as a question.
Great. Thank you so much. So I have a question on Nepal. How does this increase of majoritarianism affects religious minorities in the country? And another question for all speakers: how do you assess this, if like the population supports this discourse around the majoritarianism in the countries, or it's more about the leaders who rise in this? Thank you.
Sorry, I seem to have muted myself earlier, but I'll try to answer both questions. So I think if I can start with the earlier question, I think NGOs do play a very important role, as Suvechchha has said, about trying to build trust at the community level. But I think that can only go so far. And at another point, so I would say that that NGO trust building work is at one end of the spectrum. But the other end of the spectrum, you have to talk about structural changes, and that's where you have to engage with political leaders, political parties. You have to challenge populist politicians. I think the second question asks about that, and you have to, in some ways, you have to hold them to account and to challenge what they're saying. And sometimes, as I said in my presentation, some of these populist politicians are protected or enjoy a degree of impunity because they come from the majority religion. And therefore, when it comes to legal action or law enforcement, they seem to escape. And so, again, the role of NGOs, I think, is important to call out that and to have the degree of transparency to point out where laws are being unequally or asymmetrically applied. And so I think that's an important role for NGOs. And that's where I think NGOs then get into trouble with law enforcement agencies and authorities, because, challenging the power, speaking truth to power, invites a punitive, or can invite a punitive response from the authorities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Suvechchha, we'll go to you and then we'll wrap up with Shaloom.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah, the question was about how is it undermining the minority rights? Well, I mean, in terms of Nepal, I think it's the very beginning at the moment. But as I said, like the way Hindu identity has been pushed, though it's a secular country, so that somehow neglects the other religion. And also the policies in Nepal are largely like, I mean, it does favor Hindu religion. Like there is, just to give an example, and there is anti-religion conversion laws in Nepal, and other religion, especially Christianity, is not looked upon in a very positive light in Nepal. So, and even as an NGO, we sometimes, get this sort of accusations that we are trying to spread Christianity in Nepal. So yeah, I mean, other religions, especially Christianity, is not looked upon in a very positive light, because it's also one of the, one of the religion that is increasing very the numbers are increasing in Nepal. And I think we see the severe cases during the time of crisis. During COVID, there was this, rumors and hate speeches that was spreading for the Muslim minorities in Nepal, that they're trying to, they're going out and they're trying to spread this coronavirus or pandemic. So those kind of its speech and those kind of things become really severe during the time of crisis. But in terms of policies, it's I think it's in the societal level that you see this inequalities and division more. In a policy level, it's still not very, very, very like unequal in Nepal. I mean, if I'll have to speak in terms of Nepal.
Thank you, Suvechchha. Shaloom, we can wrap up with your thoughts.
Yes. So if I put India and Pakistan as examples in front of me, so they in the current times they have Pakistan after the 70s, and if we look at the example of India, it's like from past couple of decades. We can take 3 decades from 90s. So yes, there have been a population support towards the majoritarian understanding of the politics, of towards the religious majoritarian understanding of the politics. But then again, we have to look that if the rights of the minorities are at stake or not. And that where the majoritarianism is differentiated from the democracy. So we have to have the institutions which safeguard the rights of the minorities. Our very discussion started from the Camus quotation, which just shared, that the democracy is the system where the weakest of the minorities are protected. And even if the most of the population of the country is supporting for a majoritarian structure and is supporting to uplift the people in the religious majority, but still there should be some factors, there should be some machinery at working, and that machinery has to be legal, which should be there to protect the rights of the minorities. So the condition in Pakistan and India, it's not very great in the terms of the majoritarian political support towards such sentiments, because if we look, the far right governments are at the rise, and both in India and Pakistan from past couple of from at least past 2 tenures. So that is an alarming situation. But at the very same time, there is one institution which can help to prevent the rights of the minorities, and that is the institution of judiciary, and that is the institution of the constitution. So we have to divert our fight for the rights of the minorities to be more legal in nature and to be more constitutional in nature, and that can, I believe, only counter the popular support for the majoritarian structures.
Thank you, Shaloom, and to each of our speakers for sharing your expertise, your experience across sort of a broad region, a broad context. And I think you did a really good job sort of sharing your expertise with us today. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This webinar is hosted by the Asia Religious and Ethnic Freedom Project, which is a USAID funded project led by the American Bar Association, Rule of Law Initiative, Freedom House, Introduce, Search for Common Ground. We can learn more about the project, follow along with the learning pieces that are coming out all of the time. We're having events like this each quarter. You'll get all of those in your email. If you'd like to connect with any of our speakers to follow up on collaboration, feel free to reach out to us along with any questions you might have. But thank you again so much to each of our speakers and for all of you for joining us today. Have a great one, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you so much for the time. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.